Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says the future of Afghanistan is now in the hands of Kabul administration. The Foreign Minister was briefing the media after his return from Doha, where he attended the historic peace deal signing between the US and the Taliban. Qureshi said it is up to the Afghan government to show flexibility for stability in the country. Qureshi said he met US Secretary Mike Pompeo in Doha and warned him about potential spoilers of the peace process. Qureshi said he has also discussed reconstruction of the post-war Afghanistan and return of the refugees with the US Secretary. In a related development, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani says he has not committed to releasing 5,000 Taliban prisoners. The prisoner release is a pivotal prong of the peace deal signed between the US and the Taliban in Doha yesterday. At a press conference in Kabul, Ghani said it can be included in intra-Afghan talks agenda, but cannot be a precondition for the dialogue. The president said releasing prisoners is not in the authority of the US. Rather, it is a decision for the Afghan government to make. Criticizing the peace deal, Ghani said an agreement signed behind the closed doors will have basic problems in its implementation. Ghani also spoke about the team which will attend intra-Afghan negotiations in Doha with the Taliban on March the 10th. He said delegation's authority is limited as the ultimate decision maker is either Parliament, the Grand Council, or a referendum. Meanwhile, Afghanistan has been in a state of war for decades, and now, after the signing of the deal between the US and the Taliban, many Afghans consider it as an important step towards sustainable peace. Let's take a look at their reaction to the development in this report.
A landmark peace deal between the US and Taliban has been signed in Doha, raising hopes for a sustainable intra-Afghan dialogue. This could result in an end to the deadly 19-year-old conflict. Many Afghans hope the development will bring peace to the country.
I think it was a very important step towards peace and stability in Afghanistan, and we have to be optimistic towards the next step.
We are delighted because of the peace process between the US and Taliban, which resulted after 18 months today.
The Afghan president's spokesperson Sadiq Siddiqui says the peace process is conditional and the Taliban will have to abandon violence.
So the agreement with the Taliban is based on conditions. The important condition is for the Taliban to abandon violence, and they enter into a peace process in which it can guarantee a sustainable peace. If the Taliban does not abide by those conditions, of course, the Afghan government and the security forces were all ready to defend this country.
Experts say the US-Taliban deal is a first milestone in the Afghan peace process.
The most important aspect of this agreement is that it's the first concrete milestone in an Afghan peace process. There have been efforts over a decade now to try to get a peace process launched, and this is the first tangible outcome of those efforts. Now, whether it actually sticks and whether it produces actual peace in Afghanistan remains to be seen.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has also heralded the agreement as an important step towards lasting peace.
In an interesting turn of events, it has been revealed that India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi does not qualify as a citizen of India according to his own controversial citizenship law. Modi is a citizen of India by birth but lacks documentation to back it. The revelation was made by Modi's office in response to a recent query made under the Right to Information Act. On February 17, a person named Subankar Sarkar asked if the Prime Minister possessed citizenship documents. The Prime Minister's office said Modi is Indian by birth according to the Clause 3 of the Citizenship Act 1955. Ironically, the BJP government's law does not recognize citizenship by birth without documents. India has imposed a curfew in some areas of northeast Meghalaya state after 3 people were killed in clashes over the new Citizenship Act. Since December 11th, 70 people have lost their lives in nationwide protests against the discriminatory law. Clashes broke out between the two groups on Friday during a meeting on the Citizenship Amendment Act in East Khasi Hills district. Meanwhile, the Indian government has ordered a Polish student from Jadavpur University to leave the country within 15 days for participating in the protests. Indian police have also registered 22 FIRs against anti-CAA protesters in Aligarh district of Uttar Pradesh state. The northern states officials have issued 500 notices to the protesters since February 23rd. Indian troops have martyred 10 Kashmiri civilians during the month of February. In January, the Indian forces martyred 21 civilians in the occupied valley. In a report, the Kashmiri media said 3 were martyred in a fake encounter or in custody of the troops. It says 7 others were martyred during a coordinated search operations across the valley last month. It said 30 people have been critically injured due to the use of brute force and firing of tear gas shells by the security personnel. The valley is reeling under Indian curfew and the clampdown for the last 210 days. Turkey says its forces have downed 2 Syrian government jets after its armed drone was targeted in Idlib. Syrian state media confirmed that Turkish forces targeted 2 government warplanes. Tensions in the region have escalated in recent days after 34 Turkish troops were killed in government air raids on Idlib. The toll was the biggest military loss the Turkish military has suffered since it intervened in the Syrian conflict in 2016. Responding, Ankara said it struck scores of Syrian government targets and neutralized over 2,000 Syrian soldiers. These confrontations have added to soaring tensions between Turkey and Russia, which support opposing sides of the Syrian civil war. Turkey says it wants the US to send Patriot missiles for backup in Syria's northwestern province of Idlib. Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu made the comment to reporters in Doha after a meeting with the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He said Turkey and Russia are working for a lasting peace and binding ceasefire in Idlib. Attacks by the Syrian government forces killed 55 Turkish soldiers this month in northwestern Syria. President Tayyip Erdogan has threatened to push back Syrian forces if they do not pull back to predetermined lines. Çavuşoğlu said the Idlib issue can only be settled in a meeting between Erdogan and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Turkey says over 47,000 migrants have departed to Europe via its northwestern border province of Idrin. This comes after President Tayyip Erdogan announced Turkey has opened the doors to Europe for migrants fleeing war-torn Syria. In a tweet, Turkish Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu confirmed the increasing number of migrants crossing the border to Europe. Meanwhile, Greece has pushed back 400 migrants entering the country. Police fired tear gas to avert stone-throwing migrants as they tried to cross the border. The government spokesman, Stellis Betsas, said Greece withstood and organized an illegal attempt of border violation. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu hit back, saying Greece lectures on international law while shamelessly throwing tear gas bombs on innocent people. In Iraq, the parliament has delayed a vote of confidence in Prime Minister-designate Mohammad Alawi's government for a 3rd time over a lack of quorum. The speaker did not schedule a new date for the session, but said a constitutional deadline for the vote would expire on Monday. Meanwhile, thousands of people took to the streets of Baghdad, calling for the removal of the country's ruling elite. Wearing protective face masks, the protesters chanted slogans against Prime Minister-designate Mohammad Alawi. A political crisis has gripped the country since October last year, killing over 500 people in mass protests against corruption and unemployment. In Iran, a health ministry spokesman has reported 11 more deaths from coronavirus, raising the death toll to 54. In a televised speech, he said there were 385 new cases of the infected people in the last 24 hours, increasing the total number to 978. Most of the victims are from the capital, Tehran, and the city of Qom, where the cases of COVID-19 first emerged. Meanwhile, Iran's Revolutionary Guard commander says they have allocated facilities in various cities to eradicate coronavirus. The virus has so far killed over 2,900 people, worldwide. New coronavirus has rattled the global economy as the virus continues to spread across the continents. Investors are running for the hills as fears of the economic slowdown and a possible recession loom. This report has the details.
Disruptions to international travel and supply chains, school closures, and cancellation of major events have blackened the outlook for the world economy. Equities from the United States to Europe and Asia have recorded their worst week since the 2008 global financial crisis. S&P Dow Jones indices note global markets have lost $6 trillion in value just this week. But President Donald Trump says the markets will recover even after the U.S. markets crashed following the pandemic fears.
The markets will all come back. The markets are very strong. The consumer is unbelievably strong. The companies are very strong. We have one problem. We have to get this problem brought into focus, and it is right now. I think our professionals are doing a great job. I'm not thinking in terms. Well, it's certainly not a good situation.
Economists say a technical recession is imminent.
As cynical as it might sound, the markets are infected. There's this uncertainty about what the virus will do next. Will there be a pandemic, and will economic activities be dramatically affected? What's clear is that we will see a technical recession in the first and second quarter in several countries, including Germany. That's not good for shares, but above all, the uncertainty is poisonous for stock markets. We don't know how things will develop.
Brent crude oil recorded its biggest weekly decline in 4 years due to the dipping global demand, causing rise in the surplus of crude supply on the market.
Pope Francis has announced he will skip a week-long Lenten spiritual retreat due to cold. The pontiff was scheduled to attend the event with senior Vatican officials. It is the first time that Francis has missed the annual retreat south of Rome since his election in 2013. Pope Francis made the surprise announcement to a crowd in St. Peter's Square. He coughed several times while making his brief address. The Pope has taken ill at a time when Italy is battling a surging outbreak of the deadly coronavirus. Muhyiddin Yassin has been sworn in as Malaysia's new Prime Minister a week after Mahathir Mohamad stepped down. The 72-year-old former Interior Minister is the 8th Premier of the Southeast Asian nation. He was sworn in at a palace ceremony in front of King Abdullah. Reacting to the development, Mahathir promised to seek a vote in the parliament to challenge Muhyiddin's support. Talking to media in Kuala Lumpur, Mahathir said Muhyiddin did not have the support from most of the country's 222 MPs.
This is a very strange thing because the result of the 14th election should be that the winners form the government. Here we are going to see from the same election, the losers will form the government. The winners will be in the opposition.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Hundreds of protesters, some armed with petrol bombs, have rallied in Hong Kong to mark 6 months of police crackdown on demonstrations. Police used tear gas to disperse the protesters who gathered in and around Mong Kok district and the Prince Edward subway station. Demonstrators chanted slogans of liberation and revolution and called for police force to be disbanded. In a statement, the police said they used minimum necessary force for the dispersal and arrest operations. The clashes now are among the most violent ones after a period of relative calm following intense anti-government protests that broke out in June of last year. Earlier this week, publishing tycoon Jimmy Lay's arrest for financing the protests brought the movement back into the spotlight. Israel is set to hold its third election in less than a year as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fights for his political survival. After 2 failed attempts to form a government, the country is in a political chaos, being led by the interim administration. 2 previous rounds of voting, one in April 2019 and second in September, delivered nothing but successive deadlocks. More in this report.
In a bid to reclaim power, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is once again facing off against his former army chief of staff, Benny Gantz. Charged with bribery, breach of trust and fraud, Netanyahu has been in office from 1996 to 1999 and again from 2009 onwards. Polls suggest neither side will have enough seats in Israel's parliament to end the crisis, and the country may be dragged into yet another months-long election cycle regardless.
Do you see this? This is the truth. Gantz cannot achieve a government without Tibi. He can't. This is a fact. It's a mathematical fact, not some other fact. This is the truth. And people try to hide this truth. And I ask you to tell this truth, because what's at stake is huge. We are within touching distance from a great victory.
Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party and Gantz's centrist Blue and White party are the main contenders. Hoping to dislodge Netanyahu in tomorrow's election, Gantz has based his entire election campaign on Netanyahu's corruption indictment and a call to form a secular government.
We want to form a unity government based on secular parties like Kahol Lavan, Likud, Israel Betenu, maybe Labour. But from there on, we have the principles, we have the outlines, we have the framework. Everybody will be welcome to join us.
No single party has ever won an outright majority in an Israeli election. If Gantz-led Blue and White edges out Likud, it will require support from other lawmakers to form a government.
In the U.S., former Vice President Joe Biden has won the South Carolina primary, reviving his flagging campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination. Biden's triumph has ended rival Bernie Sanders' winning streak of Iowa, New Hampshire and Nevada. The race now pivots immediately to a new phase when 14 Super Tuesday states take the campaign nationwide early next week. With 99% of the ballots counted in South Carolina, Biden has 48.5% of the vote. Sanders is next with around 20%, followed by billionaire activist Tom Steyer with 11%. Biden celebrated his victory, saying he will defeat President Donald Trump if nominated by the Democrats. In Venezuela, opposition leader Juan Guaido has escaped an assassination attempt after a masked gunman opened fire during a march in Barquez Metro City. Guaido's media office says the opposition leader's vehicle was hit by 9 bullets. The opposition has blamed pro-government vigilantes known as Colectivo, which support President Nicolas Maduro, for the attack. City's former mayor and opposition activists said the marchers were ambushed by about 200 Colectivo members and forces loyal to Maduro. Guaido has called on his supporters to show strength as a 16-year-old demonstrator was injured and several others roughed up.
The dictatorship could have killed me today. They shot, fired firearms near us, pointed me out, but that is not going to push us back, nor the persecution of my family members, nor politically prosecute us. For us, the limit is the physical limit. We have put our lives at the service of this cause.
In Somalia, 4 government soldiers have been killed after a bomb blast targeted a military convoy near the town of Waramahan in Lower Shabelle region. An army official says several others were wounded in the attack. He said Al-Shabaab militants attacked military personnel traveling from Wanalabin and Afgoy. Al-Qaeda affiliated group Al-Shabaab has claimed the responsibility for the attack. Tajikistan is voting in the parliamentary polls, marking its first balloting since the Supreme Court banned the main opposition group in 2015. President Emomali Rahman's ruling party is expected to sweep the polls as only one critical party is taking part in today's elections. The Central Election Commission said 241 candidates have been registered to participate. The sole opposition party competing for the ballot, the Social Democratic Party of Tajikistan, has never entered parliament before. President Rahman's People's Democratic Party of Tajikistan currently dominates the chamber, holding 51 seats out of 63. At least 50% of all the voters must cast their ballots for the election today to be considered valid. If the turnout is less than 50%, a new election will be called. Slovakia's opposition, led by the Ordinary People Party, has won the parliamentary election. Complete results showed Olano took over 25% of the vote, far ahead of the ruling Smer with over 18%. Prime Minister Peter Pellegrini from Smer acknowledged defeat and said the party's run in power was over. Olano leader Igor Matovic said that they take the result as a request from the people who want them to clean up Slovakia. He says Slovakia will become a country where law applies to everybody regardless of rich or poor. The vote was dominated by public anger over the murder of an investigative journalist and his fiancée in 2018. In Kazakhstan, police have detained dozens of opposition supporters who took to the streets after the death of an anti-government activist. Activist Dolat Agadil died in a jail cell on Tuesday, a day after police took him in on the charges of contempt of court. The authorities say his death was caused by a heart failure, ruling out any foul play. Agadil's case has galvanized the oil-rich Central Asian nations' opposition movement. But police in Nur Sultan and Almaty detained dozens of activists while they were walking towards the rallying points. Street protests are illegal in Kazakhstan unless sanctioned by the government authorities. Thousands of people gathered in Moscow to mark the 5 years since the murder of prominent Kremlin critic Boris Nemtsov. Organizers said the march is also a protest against planned changes to Russia's constitution. It is the first major demonstration organized by Russia's political opposition since President Vladimir Putin proposed changes to the constitution. The proposals are widely seen as a means to allow Putin to extend his grip on power after leaving the presidency. It will be put to a national vote on April the 22nd. Over 22,000 people rallied in a square around 2 kilometers from the Kremlin. Demonstrators carried photos of Nemtsov and posters reading "No to Eternal Putin." The UK and EU are set to begin their post-Brexit trade negotiations in Brussels tomorrow to finalize a deal before the end of the transition period. London and Brussels have already unveiled their draft documents for the negotiations. The UK and the EU have until June to agree on a trade deal, which has to be finalized by September. They will hold talks on a range of areas from fishing and financial services, as well as the controversial level playing field rules for the UK. London says it is not obligated to align any of its laws with that of the EU and its institutions. Ahead of the negotiations, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has threatened a no deal if sufficient progress is not made by June. The French government says it will push President Emmanuel Macron's contested pension reform through the parliament by decree. This will avoid the need for a vote after the opposition filed more than 40,000 amendments to the draft law. The reform has prompted weeks of public sector strikes and protests before opponents of the legislation took the battle to the parliament. Macron loyalists branded the mountain of amendments a cynical ploy to stall the pension bill's passage through the parliament. The reform aims to merge 42 sector-specific pension regimes into a single points-based system. The French government says it will be more transparent while also ensuring a more sound financial footing as the population ages. The Berlin International Film Festival has drawn to a close with an Iranian filmmaker winning the Golden Bear. From Hillary Clinton to film industry's mega giants, the evening was full of stars and surprises. More in this report.
The 70th annual event kicked off in Berlin on 20th February with a gala and was followed by the world premiere of the film My Salinger Year. Mohammad Rasool's film There Is No Evil was awarded the Golden Bear. Rasulov is currently banned from leaving Iran for participation in social and political activities. The director's daughter, Baran Rasulov, who also stars in the movie, accepted the award on her father's behalf.
Thank you so much. Obviously, I'm very, very overwhelmed and happy about this award. And at the same time, I'm very sad because this is for a filmmaker who couldn't be here tonight. And I think I can say on behalf of everybody on the team that this is for him.
The Silver Bear for the Best Director went to South Korea's Hong Sang-soo for his soul-set drama, The Woman Who Ran. American writer-director Eliza Hittman won the Silver Bear Grand Jury Prize for Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. The film is based on a story of two teenagers from the rural U.S. who traveled to New York for the abortion.
For approaching a very complicated subject with maturity far belying their years.
Meanwhile, Paula Bear of Undine got Silver Bear for Best Actress. Silver Bear for Best Actor went to Elio Germano for the movie Hidden Away.
It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Russian President Vladimir Putin says current oil prices are acceptable despite their steep decline last week, driven by coronavirus concerns. The OPEC Plus will meet in Vienna this week to decide on further policy as their supply cut deal expires at the end of March. Addressing a meeting with Russian energy officials, Putin said for Moscow's budget and economy, the current oil prices level is acceptable, but he said it was difficult to forecast future moves in oil prices and Russia must be ready for various scenarios. On Friday, the price of Brent crude slumped to $50.05, the lowest since late 2018.
Next week, a meeting will be held in Vienna in OPEC Plus format. This mechanism that we have created together with other leading oil-producing countries has already proved to be an effective instrument to ensure long-term stability on global energy markets.
And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.